Okay, cool. Sorry for the delay, some technical problems. Yeah, I have to press this. Okay, awesome. So thank you for coming to my speech despite of the lunch break. I usually do this speech as a full format, and now I've kicked out some slides and I'm gonna try to pull it off all in 15 minutes. So the topic I'm gonna be talking today is how you should stop wasting time not writing tests. So out of 20 of you here, how many of you are developers? Can you raise your hands? Okay, awesome. And how many of you test your applications? Okay, only a couple of hands. So the people that didn't raise their hands got my question a bit wrong. I actually asked how many of you test your applications, not how many of you write automated tests for your applications. And basically, if you think of it, once you're developing a feature and trying it out in the browser, you're basically testing your app. So all of us are testing our apps. There's only a difference how we do it. So the ones that didn't raise their hands, they're actually doing manual testing or F5 testing, click and refresh, or whatever. I'm not going to go into any derogative terms. So let's talk a bit about manual testing. It actually, to me, it has three characteristics. First one, it's repetitive. So you're developing a feature, clicking around the browser to see if everything's okay, developing a bit more, clicking around, doing a bug fix, clicking. It gets really easily boring, and you don't want to do that. Second thing is that it's really, really slow. In the beginning, you might think that with manual testing, you're going to be quicker. But in the end, once you're developing your app and once it gets bigger and stays in production for 2 or 3 years, your manual tests are going to get really slow. And the third thing is they're error prone due to human memory capacity. What I mean by that is imagine you're developing a feature and it has 5 edge cases. Your boss comes in half a year later and says, okay, can you please do some refactoring here? And you're like, okay, no problem, you have no tests. I can guarantee you out of the 5, you're going to forget at least about 2 edge cases. So Bob Lord, the president of AOL, once said, whatever can be automated will inevitably be automated, and I completely agree, it should be. So let's talk a bit about automated testing. What is automated testing, actually? So it's just a process of writing and executing scripts that simulate user interactions in our application before our application gets released to production. So how is it better than manual testing? So we said that manual testing has 3 characteristics. And for first, it's not repetitive. I mean, it kind of is, but computers don't mind repetitive tasks. They're really good at it, and they don't complain. It's not that slow. Computers are way more faster than we are at clicking, and they're not error-prone due to human memory capacity because you write something down, you push it to your Git repo, it stays there. So if automated testing is so way better than manual testing, why do still some people do manual tests? So I've aggregated a couple of excuses I've heard all over the years, so let's go through them. So excuse number 1 that I've heard, and I actually said myself a couple of years, is the application is too small to write tests for it. So I work in a software agency for the last couple of years, and I had a task of building a small backend API that was serving a mobile app. And it had only 5 API endpoints. And I said, okay, I'm going to build that. I built it up in 2 days. Then an Android developer a couple of days later said, okay, can you please change API endpoint number 1? I was like, okay, no problem. I changed it, pushed it. Half an hour later, he says, okay, yeah, API endpoint number 1 is working perfectly, but you just broke the rest of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to fix that. And then that happened like 2 times or 3 times, and I said, like, okay, open up like a tutorial how to write tests. In 2 or 3 hours, I had something like 10 or 12 test cases, And whenever he asked me to change something, I would enroll those tests and they would be over in less than a second. Another thing is why you should actually write tests is because small applications tend to grow. I mean, I guess you want your application to grow because that basically means that your application is getting a bigger user base. Excuse number 2 that I've heard, and I really don't know how to cope with it, is the application is too big to write tests for it. So every time I hear that, I look a bit like this. And I heard it a couple of times, and I can say one thing. Only people who say this are developers that have big applications that are in production for a couple of years. They never wrote any tests. They don't know how to write tests. They have lots of spaghetti code, and it's really hard for them to write tests for that unstructured data. Excuse number 3 that I've heard is writing tests is boring. And I really hate it when I hear this, and I've got a question basically for everyone that ever said this. If writing tests is boring, is clicking around your application whenever something changes something you would call fun? Yeah, I don't think so. Like, writing tests is way more fun than clicking around the browser. Number 4, and this one's a horrible one. We don't have a specification. Tests are no use at all. Okay, my question for everybody that ever said this is, if you don't have a specification, how the hell are you even programming? How the hell do you even know what to program? Like, are you just making up like user requirements or application requirements? At that point, I would say just stop, arrange a meeting with your project manager, product manager, CEO, CDO, or whomever, and sort stuff out. Excuse number 5 is actually the excuse why I wrote this whole presentation, and I've heard it a whole bunch of times, and it's, we don't have time to write tests. And basically, whenever somebody says that, I look like this. And the reason I look like this is because I'm a firm believer it doesn't take extra time to write tests. And that might seem a bit weird, but just bear with me for a couple of minutes. So usually how people try to write tests once they're first starting off is that they're writing code, doing some manual tests, writing code, doing some manual tests, going in circles with that, and at the end they say, okay, I've finished my feature, and then I have to write tests. Well, that's pretty much a problem because you're looking at your feature as if it's over before you even wrote tests. And of course, it's gonna seem redundant if you just manually tested the whole thing and then start writing tests. It's gonna seem like you have a lot on your plate. My suggestion would be never separate the application and the test code. So your feature is never finished until you write the tests. The better way or the right way would be to write code, write tests, write code, write tests, and go into circles with that. Or if you see what I've kicked out from the previous slide, is you're not wasting time on automated tests, you're wasting time on initial manual testing. That is the actual overhead. So just kick it out, don't do it. I mean, sometimes you're gonna have to do it, some reasons, but for most of it, just kick it out. Let's take a fairly simple example. How many of you have built an API here? Like a backend for an API. Okay, and how did you test if your API calls are working? What kind of tools did you use? Anybody? Curl maybe? Postman? Have you heard of it? Yeah, okay. So if you've already using tools like curl or Postman, and you're writing down those test scenarios in an external tool, why just not write them down in your test case, in your test scenarios, in your test framework, whatever language you're using, and you can do continuous delivery, you can do continuous integration, and it will be way better that way. Generally, don't check your implementation in the browser or through Postman or through whatever. It's redundant from the beginning. Do it through tests. Excuse number 6 that I've heard is actually, shouldn't quality assurance engineers handle the testing phase? Well, I would say yes and no. So for one thing, why you should have tests is because simple bugs usually hide the more advanced ones. Imagine you send out your application to your quality assurance engineers and the login doesn't work. They're not going to be able to find out any of the other features that aren't actually working, that are more advanced, and they're going to focus on the simple ones. Another thing what you should do is let your quality assurance engineers actually focus on improving the user experience, improving security, and finding out weird edge cases that you didn't find out or you tried not to find out while you were developing that code. So it's basically, if you give your quality assurance engineers a bad application, the best they're going to be able to do is drive it to good. If you give them a good application, they're going to be able to drive it to excellent, and that is a fact. You're not going to have enough time once your application hits the quality assurance wall. You're not going to have enough time to go from bad to excellent. So I know a lot of people think that testing is hard and think their managers won't approve that they want to start writing tests. So how to actually start writing tests, and what a really wrong approach is that a developer says to his boss or project manager or client or whomever, I want to start writing tests. And the natural answer to that is going to be absolutely every time, we don't have time for that, we should work on new features. And that's a totally reasonable answer. My suggestion would be just try a different approach. Make tests part of your development cycle. Don't tell your project manager that you're going to write tests. Just do them. Just do them, and don't do initial manual testing, and that person is not going to be able to find out that you're actually writing tests and thinking, oh my god, this developer is totally wasting time. In conclusion, kick out manual testing. That is the overhead. And don't ask for time to do tests, just do them. Would you ever ask your project manager, can I write quality code? Probably not. Well, don't ask them for time to write tests. That is something that makes you a better developer. Okay, thank you for listening to my presentation. My name is Damir Svrtan. I'm a Rails team lead at Infinum and an organizer at Ruby Zagreb meetups. Infinum is a software agency based in Croatia. We have offices also in Slovenia and San Francisco. We're developing mobile and web apps and doing design work, so it's basically Android, iOS, Ruby on Rails, JavaScript. We're experimenting with Elixir and Phoenix and Go and with whatever. If you need any help, just ask us. I'm also the organizer of Ruby Zagreb. If you're ever in Zagreb and want to talk about Ruby or want to talk about testing, just feel free to ping us up. And thank you. This is my Twitter handle. Yeah. I guess we have time for questions if you do that. Yeah.
So you said write code, write tests, write code, write tests.
You can reverse it also.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, that was my question. Shouldn't you do like test-driven development? No,
yeah.
Write test first.
Yeah, I'm totally for test-first development and test-driven development. Just didn't focus this presentation on it,
okay.
But I would definitely suggest practicing it. I'm doing it, and it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Okay. Oh. Thanks.